Well, even though it's not always glamorous, the truth always does surface. And when it does, yikes. We now know a little bit more about the financials of Canada Post, and it's pretty heartbreaking. Like, no wonder they're going on strike. They're just trying to pass the buck a little bit further to eventually, I don't know, survive as long as they can, but it's not good. Also, hidden things that happened in Mark Carney's exclusive interview with the bald guy from CBC. Also, CBC questions Mark Carney's first day at work, right? His first day. How was school, little buddy? Well, it's kind of an interesting collab. Rosemary Barton and the bald guy from CBC do a bit of a collab on power and politics to discuss it on a panel. So we're going to be taking a look at all of that and a couple of other things. Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another video, everybody. Before we get into it, I do want to encourage you all to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It does really help grow the channel. And without further ado, let's get right into it. Starting off with Canada Post showing a massive operating loss.
Canada Post says it's presenting final offers to the Postal Workers Union in their ongoing dispute. The Crown Corporation says the offers are designed to move negotiations forward and return stability to Canada Post. The union says it returned to the table to address the key issues both parties have brought forward during this round of negotiations. The union had been in a strike position since last Friday, but opted instead for a ban on overtime. Canada Post has just released its annual report, and the numbers are pretty grim. The Crown Corporation says its operating loss for 2024 was nearly $1.3 billion. The postal worker strike in December cost the company $208 million, and total revenue for 2024 was down by $800 million, or 12%, compared to 2023. Canada Post workers are taking job action right now as well. They're refusing to work overtime while the union and corporation try to reach a new collective agreement.
Hey, Chris, like, that doesn't even make any sense. What the hell are we doing? Why are we trying to subsidize a company that's losing $1 billion a year, dude? What is up with this liberal ideology that you can just spend, and things are eventually going to work out? At what point do we cut off the arm to save the body, or cut off the hand to save the arm, right? Like, this is getting ridiculous. The fact that even mainstream media is going, and the numbers are pretty grim. Yeah, dude, that's something that we should absolutely be paying more attention to. But anyways, I'd love to know your guys' thoughts and comments on that one. Next up, we're going to be taking a look at how Ontario is amending a controversial Bill 5 amid criticism from First Nations.
We're getting started tonight with some late-day action at Queen's Park over the Ford government's controversial Bill 5. That's the one that aims to fast-track mining projects, and the government is making some last-minute changes to it after a group of Indigenous chiefs spoke out against it, and tonight the opposition is trying to stall the bill. Lorenda Redekop is live for us at Queen's Park tonight. Lorenda, tell us what's happening there behind you.
Well, Chris, right now, the NDP opposition, they're in the middle of a filibuster. And so that's in this, there's a committee room just down that hallway. They plan to sit until midnight, going through every single part of this bill. That happens with all bills, but they're going through every single clause, trying to delay this as long as they can. It is one of those political games, but one that they say is necessary.
This bill, it just takes us backward.
The opposition again warned the government about its legislation.
You can call them special economic zones, but what we know you are doing is opening up the floodgates for an abuse of power by government.
The government says the goal of those zones is to speed up big projects, such as mines, highways, and power plants. Some Indigenous leaders spoke out against the bill earlier in the week, and the government is now making some changes. In addition to those special economic zones, it says it's developing regulations for new Indigenous-led economic zones. Plus, they added an amendment that regulations will recognize Aboriginal and treaty rights, including the duty to consult, though by law, the government is already required to do that.
Under no circumstances will we compromise treaty rights, Madam Speaker, or the duty to consult. In fact, it will be a sharpened focus with First Nations who've approached us.
But Indigenous leaders warn the government could be headed towards blockades and protests, like the former federal Conservative government faced more than 10 years ago.
It's an insult to First Nations when you do things on the very last minute, at the 11th hour.
He says the government failed on consulting and feels they'll be forced to make more amendments. The Premier says these changes are needed right now.
We're in an economic war against President Trump. We want...
No, we're not. No, we're not. In fact, the tariffs have actually been reversed due to international trade court based out of the United States. So no, we are not in an economic war with the freaking United States, man. That's absurd. Like, drop that crap, Ford.
We want prosperity for the First Nations communities right across our province.
The NDP also attacked that idea, saying rights will be trampled if this bill passes.
What we cannot do is fight back against Trump's trade war by adopting Trump-style tactics, right? But that is exactly what this Premier and his government are doing.
Outside Queen's Park, people protested against the bill, Indigenous people and environmentalists. It would also water down the Endangered Species Act, giving Cabinet the final say on whether a species should be protected.
And here inside Queen's Park, it could be a pretty late night for some MPPs. I'm told that the latest that committee meeting can go is until midnight. And so that filibuster, it will continue. They are on a dinner break right now. They'll be back at 7 p.m. And I just spoke with a Liberal MPP who was walking out of the committee. He says they are also taking part in that filibuster. So a few more hours to go. They are requesting votes on every single piece of that legislation.
Sounds like a busy and potentially late night there at the legislature. Lorenda Redekop for us live at Queen's Park. Thank you, Lorenda.
Yeah, any politician in Canada that now keeps going, we're in an economic trade war with America, you know that they're full of freaking crap, man. Like, we all knew that this was not really going to last, this economic trade war rhetoric, and it didn't. In fact, it's done now. It's done. I don't believe that Canada is going to actually enter this economic trade war with America. There was a lot of turbulence. It was very shaky. We went right through an election. It was favorable for the bad guys. Trump wanted the bad guys to win so he can manipulate them so he could eventually get the 51st state. There you go. It's all unraveling itself, but that's my opinion. I would absolutely love to know yours. Next up, we're taking a look at this Power in Politics collab. You got Rosemary Barton and the bald guy from CBC and whoever the hell this is. Let's take a look at this panel talking about Carney's first day back at work.
Bureau Chief for Radio Canada. Good to see you both on yet another busy day here in Ottawa. Rosie, let's start with you. What was your impression of Mark Carney's? He's done a lot since he's been Prime Minister, but he's never gone to question period until today.
No, he's never gone to question period. And so I think, the expectations were fairly high in terms of how he would perform, particularly because he wasn't facing Pierre Poilievre, and I know we'll talk about that, but he was facing a very experienced politician in the form of Andrew Scheer, someone who's been in the House for more than 2 decades now, if I'm not mistaken, and has been the Speaker of the House and the leader of the party. So it wasn't nothing to go up against Andrew Scheer. And I would say he did just fine. His first outing in question period was there were no mistakes, there were no screw-ups, and he seemed to be enjoying himself. He had answers, although very broad for most of the questions.
Yes, they were.
He deflected when he needed to. He cracked a joke at the expense of the Bloc Québécois in French. So listen, in terms of a first outing, it was perfectly acceptable and fine. Lots of room for improvement, but I know that the Liberals were happy with how he did today.
Louis, what are your thoughts?
I was there. I was in the gallery, and I was looking at him, and he didn't really look at his notes.
No,
he was just playing with a pen. He seems fairly amused of the whole exercise, especially when there were ministers answering to Bloc Québécois MPs especially. He seemed to have fun with that, so we'll see. I think he was having fun there, but you know what? I think in 2 or 3 months, he will probably be bored to death by the exercise. We'll see. And even today, he didn't last the whole show. He left maybe about after 30, 40 minutes maybe. So I'm not sure. The fact that he's not doing the Prime Minister's question period anymore tells me that I don't think he's very interested in that form of political theater. He's more interested in what's going on behind the scenes in the meeting. So I don't think it's really his style of leadership in that.
Well, just on that, the Prime Minister's question period is they do this in Britain. Justin Trudeau adopted it. The Prime Minister would take every question on Wednesday when they're there. I was told that he's not going to do that because he intends to be there with more frequency than Justin Trudeau was. I mean, I don't know, but that's what people say.
They also say, oh, he's going to give more space to his ministers. That that's a fine thing to say, but really, I don't think he's interested in being there.
He did the leaders round, which was sort of typical before Justin Trudeau. So he just took the questions from the leaders, and there's only 2 of them now, so that was fairly easy. I do think, though, once we get into the meatier substance of what the government is doing, and the questions become real, or if there is a crisis or a scandal or a problem, that's when he will be tested, really, in a moment in question period, because that's when you really have to know how to defend yourself, the people around you, and your decisions. And, we're just at the beginning of things.
Yeah. And one thing that's striking.
I don't think Carney did a good job of presenting his ideas and showing his point of view. I think that he failed on a lot of different levels. He was made to look like a fool. I mean, Andrew Scheer did that. And if I'm being objective, Andrew Scheer is good. He's the funny guy in the Conservative Party, at least. Oftentimes he's the funny guy. He's really, really smart. I don't mean funny as in stupid. I mean, he's like very, very witty with his comebacks and his remarks and the way he goes about things. It can be annoying. Like, I wouldn't want to go against him, right? I definitely wouldn't want to go against Andrew Scheer. But man, Pierre Poilievre is the final boss. Like, he is so good on his feet in the House. It's like he loves that type of spotlight, and that's where he thrives the best. And the fact that Mark Carney was already struggling against everybody except Pierre, who's yet to go up against, shows that he ain't ready for the big leagues, man. He is not ready at all.
Me is where some former ministers at the end completely of the room. Bill Blair,
the front
Jonathan
row.
Wilson. Yeah, the front row,
but at the end.
Like close to the exit door, the exit sign in the Commons, and Karina Gould. There was just something striking to see, the difference in the transition.
That's where you sit, privy councillors who are no longer in cabinet.
The image was kind of, I don't know, and it seems that there's a big change. Well, the big guys are still there. Dominique Leblanc, François Champagne, Mélanie Joly were still around him, but there was something, when Cody Blois, who was a minister not a long time ago, now it's so far from the action. The image was a kind of strong.
I mean, our colleague JP Tasker was.
It was interesting seeing a lot of familiar faces, even on the Liberal side. And it was also equally as interesting seeing a lot of new faces. It's going to take some getting used to, right? We've all kind of created a narrative, almost like TV characters for these folks. At least I have. I'm not going to speak on behalf of you, but I feel like I've viewed these people as, it's like you're watching a TV show. Nothing like Friends or How I Met Your Mother, but you're watching the House of Canada, TV channel type of thing. And it was weird. It just felt different without Pierre. It felt different vibe. Of course it did, though, right? That's to be expected. It's literally a different vibe. I'd love to know your guys' thoughts and comments about CBC's analysis versus mine. Maybe you have agreements. Maybe you have disagreements. Let me know down below. Now we're going to take a look at hidden parts of the Mark Carney interview that you may have missed if you previously watched it. Let's take a look.
How would you characterize it? I mean, have you moved closer? I mean, he's going to be in Canada on around the 15th of June for the G7. Yep. Could you have a deal by then, a deal by Canada Day, or does this sort of thing that moves into maybe, the Kuzma review time period, which Mexico is now saying could start in September?
I don't think it's in either of our nation's interest for it to drag out that long. I think the issues are getting a sharper relief. But we're going to take as much as time as necessary to get the right deal for Canada, but no more.
Okay, but so do you agree?
Like the 51st state, baby. Like the 51st state. Here it comes.
With the Mexican economy minister, I think, said today, end of September is when Kuzma starts. Is that the period between now and then that you think you can have this resolved with the United States?
I have a slightly different view. I didn't see the specific comments, but the actual Kuzma review period starts in 2026. So, look, there are specific issues, the border, fentanyl, tariffs. Canada's made tremendous progress. We're securing our border. You heard the speech from the throne doing even more, another 1,000 border CBSA agents, border services agents, another 1,000 RCMP personnel, a series of other measures which will exhaust our interview time if I go through them to secure the border. So we're making huge progress. the amount of fentanyl going across our border is down 90%. We're less than 0.1% of the U.S. imports of that horrible drug. And the bigger issue now is northbound drugs and guns. So look, we've made a lot of progress. We think we should be moving off of those tariffs. The U.S. should be moving off those tariffs. We are stronger together in autos. The auto pact's been in place my entire life. I'm not that young anymore, so it just shows you the value of being together. Same with steel and aluminum and the other trade challenges. So we want to make direct progress on those issues before we have the broader review of USMCA.
On the relationship, though, overall, Prime Minister, I mean, there seems to have been progress on at least
without question, there is progress, David.
For sure, but on the recognition of sovereignty, right? The president said he still likes the idea of the 51st state, but he's not going to talk about it. Ambassador Hoekstra says
the idea of me playing in the NHL, David, but it's not going to.
So this is so funny because right when he said this interview aired live. This was a live stream on CBC. Right after that was said, Trump went to Truth Social, and that's when he made the comment about how we wouldn't have to pay for the Golden Dome if we became the 51st state, and Canada is taking it very seriously, very, very seriously. It's just hilarious. Hilarious timing, man. And then what the heck is up with this comment about Mark Carney? I would have liked to play in the NHL. Like, what does that have to do with anything? It's just so weird. So weird.
Yeah, absolutely fair. But he still talks about getting the auto sector. The president does. He still has the tariffs against the auto sector and talks about making it economically unviable to make cars in Canada and to move it to the United States. So the economic threat still persists.
One of the issues for the United States and by extension for Canada is, can the U.S. auto sector be viable and truly competitive versus Asian competition, particularly Chinese competition, but broader global competition? Can it be viable if it's just an American auto sector, or U.S. auto sector? The answer is no. And we have a great auto sector, great auto parts sector, and that integration of the auto sector is part of what will make North America competitive, and that's what we're working towards.
The line you said with some frequency during the election was he wants to break us so he can own us. Do you still believe that's true?
I think the president, I won't look into his soul, but the president is recognizing, as others are, just how strong and free Canada is. And so if you look at the speech from the throne today, as you did, this is about investing in Canada. This is about building Canada, about making one Canadian economy out of 13. It's about nation-building projects. Each of those and those together give us much, much more than could ever be taken away by trade action. This is a confident country moving forward, and it's an exciting time.
Look, I do want to go through some of the specific measures from the speech from the throne, but just one more on the United States, because when you said the process of deepening integration is over, is that a permanent state of affairs in your view? Is that something about the changing nature of America as a country, or is it specific to this period under President Trump?
Well, I'd roll back 40 years since we're looking at the broader sweep of history, maybe even a little more. A steady process of integration, integrating the auto sector, as I mentioned when I was first born, then moving to broader goods, services, financial services, even some people talking as little as a few years ago about having a customs union with the United States, greater freedom of movement of labor. That's not going to happen. That reliance, we are seeing the danger of over-reliance on the United States economically and also from a security perspective. So we will, as I said the other day, we will cooperate where necessary, when it's in both of our interests very clearly, but we won't necessarily cooperate. So we, as a confident country with an ambitious plan, we look outwards. We look to Europe. We look to Asia. We look to new partners that we're going to deepen with. And that's a big element of what we're laying out in the speech.
So when you look to Europe on the security and defense arrangements, is that to sort of augment the ones that exist with the United States or to reduce the reliance there? Is it a hedge or a replacement?
Well, it's both. Diversification depends. Look, and I say it's both. I'm not trying to avoid the question or be clever. The point is we need to do much more to secure our borders, to secure our Arctic, to secure Canada. So we're going to need to spend more. We recognize that. Now we're going to do it in a way that is in the best interest of Canada, with partners on which we can rely, get best value for money, but also make more of that investment here in Canada, so we're growing jobs and livelihoods in our own country. You know this. Some may not have followed as closely. We're spending over 75 cents on every dollar of capital spend for defense goes to the United States. Right. That's not smart. What's better if...
At least he recognizes it. I mean, I can appreciate that. At least he recognizes how little amount of money we actually put into our investments, into our defense. I mean, that's a step in the right direction.
We spend more at home if we have diversified partnerships. Look, part of what's been happening in the last few months since I became Prime Minister is a number of conversations of increasing specificity with our major European partners so that we become defense partners with them, that we become part of a very big build-out of their defense industrial base, which will have big benefits for jobs here in Canada. We're making great progress on that, and by Canada Day, we'd like to see something concrete there.
Okay, but you also...
Canada Day is going to be an important date in our calendar.
What do you want to see on Canada Day specifically, sort of on the defense side of things?
So you see a couple of things by Canada Day will happen. First, we have...
Tax cut and free trade, right?
Well, we have a tax cut, middle-class tax cut, and, first item that we put on the table as government following being elected is go straight to affordability, that tax cut for 22 million Canadian taxpayers, up to $840 a year for a two-income family. So real money for people delivered on July 1st. That's the first bill. In fact, the Minister of Finance tabled the Ways and Means today in Parliament. But on defense, two things. One, we have a summit, EU-Canada summit, just before the NATO summit, third week of June. At the NATO summit, NATO partners are going to be asked to spend more, to do more, for mutual protection. We're going to participate in that. But part of the way we want to participate in that is with new partners, with European partners, yes, with the United States, yes, on our own, in a way that's best for Canada. So look for some agreement and some progress in both of those.
But Mark Rutte said, I believe it was yesterday, that they think the target, forget 3.5%, they want to go maybe as high as 5%. Now, that feels like an aggregate number, maybe for the alliance in general, but Canada is not at 2% and won't be till at least 2027, maybe a little bit later.
Oh my goodness, dude. We can't be waiting that long to hit the bare minimum 2%. We really gotta be above 3 or 4%. Like immediately. We can't afford to wait that long. We can't wait to be reactive to a situation that's ongoing. That's not how the world works. You don't plan. You don't make a plan after you've been punched in the face. You have a plan to either avoid getting hit in the face, or a plan on how you're going to react after getting hit in the face. But you don't wait till you get hit in the face to then start building something. You don't wait to get bombarded or bombed by another country to then say, you know what, now's a great time to invest in our defense system. No, man, you do it now. You do it before it gets to that point as a preventative measure or as a freaking to be a goalie for your own country. He should know about this. We should be pumping way more. We should be doubling the amount of investments we're putting into our military right off the hop. Right off the hop.
Reasonably commit to something even beyond 2 at this point?
I think there's a couple of things. One is we start with results. What is necessary to secure our country? First and foremost, our borders, the Arctic, our sovereignty. Then what do we need to do with our partners in NATO for a safer world that has an impact on Canada, and that would include our commitments in Ukraine. What do we need to do? Then what could it cost? Then how do we get those costs down, and how do we make sure those expenditures benefit Canada as much as possible? I'm not a fan of picking an arbitrary number and then trying to figure out how to spend up to it.
Well,
all of that said, sorry, David, is we are definitely going to have to spend more. Mm-hmm. We are going to have to spend more sooner. That's one of the reasons why we will have a fall budget, not a budget tomorrow, because we're part of these deeper discussions on the defense side.
Okay, I want to dive into sort of the 7 priorities.
Even the budget is so greasy, man. Like, they've had time to put together a budget, and it's not a budget to debate on in September or in the fall. It's a budget that they're just announcing, this is what we're doing. That's insane. We haven't seen this. Oh my goodness, man. If it was all going to the right places, I wouldn't even have an issue with it. Like if our government was spending money appropriately in all the right places, not that I don't view myself as the deemer of all knowing things. Like, of course, I have a bias on what I would like to see that money being spent on. Everybody does. But there's definitely a right to be a little skeptical with how liberals spend money. Right? We've seen that for 10 freaking years. So just giving them this unchecked, bank account here, put your name on it, and it's the money is left blank for you to write a check to however much you want, to whomever you want, to whatever department. That's a little scary. It doesn't feel like a democracy. Now, don't get me wrong. If the shoe were on the other foot, and if the Conservatives had that type of power, and if they won based off of their cost of platform and their campaign, we'd be putting way more money into the military. I wouldn't even blink my eyes at it. Say, go for it. You guys have said you're going to put all the money in the right places that Canada needs. Go for it. So yeah, I have my bias. Of course, everybody does.
In your mandate letter, what appears to be a mission-driven approach to government, I would take from that. The list is limited, but each one of them is quite broad in terms of what fits in there. But I want to ask specifically about housing. And now, I know you said you don't want to force down the price of existing houses. You want to reduce the cost, increase the affordability of new builds, but the GST cut at the front end, driving down development fees to make it more affordable while driving up wages. So buying power, it makes it easier to own a home. So like a simple measure of that is the price to income ratio. And over the last 20 years, that has just gotten impossibly unbearable in a lot of big markets. Like 20 years ago in Toronto, it was 5 to 6 times an average salary. Now it's like 11 to 12. What sort of a ratio are you aiming for with this policy? What's an affordability standard for
it comes back into, it comes into several things. Now you've asked a very complicated question and you've layered it down. And the bottom line is for Canadians, can I get a mortgage? Can I afford the mortgage payments and I can buy the house? Part of what's shifted is the length of those mortgages and the cost of those mortgages. So there's multiple factors that have to happen here. One is we've got to get take-home pay up for Canadians. The first easiest way to do that is to cut taxes now. We're cutting that middle-class tax cut. That's why that's the first thing we're doing. Cut taxes on first-time home buyers, younger Canadians. They're buying a new home, saving up to $50,000. In fact, in some markets, Toronto would be an example, more than $50,000 off the price of a home. That's all, the big money, obviously. Then we need to get supply up in order to get that. At the same time, and we have a very ambitious plan, you'll see that roll out more into the fall setting of Parliament for that to roll out, to get supply up, double the rate of home building, all while growing the economy, because what we need to see is incomes grow. So you combine all of that with mortgage terms, you've got to pull collectively, we've got to get those numbers back, those ratios you quoted, back towards those that you started with.
Well, what's the horizon here? I bought my first house at 28. So if you're a 28-year-old now looking to buy a home, it's tough depending on where you are. Like, how old will you be before it gets to that affordability level?
Look, there is no. Here's an insight. There's no monolithic houses. There's different types of houses, different types of housing markets. It's a segmented market. First point. Second point is, are we building houses more cheaply? The answer is we have to build those houses more cheaply, and there's several ways to do that. Again, cutting the GST on housing, that's one way to make the house more cheaper, sorry. The second thing is to cut development charges. So we committed in the platform, we will cut development charges in half. Development charges flow through, that's a fancy word for building the infrastructure for houses. It flows through to the end price. So we're looking at another savings on the order of magnitude of that $30,000, $50,000 off the price of houses if we do it and matched, or as we do it and matched by the provinces. Third way you do it is you change how you build houses. So much more effectively, the productivity in the housing sector in Canada has not grown for a quarter century over the period of time that you quote those figures. We've got to get that down. You can do it at scale. You can do it with prefab, modular. You can do it using Canadian timber, Canadian technology. That's what we want to catalyze. Right. Last point, David. We're going to focus first and foremost on deeply affordable housing. We have a homelessness problem in this country. I think everybody knows it. There's multiple causes. One way to address it is actually to have deeply affordable housing. We're going to focus in on that. That is a role for government. It's a role for the federal government to catalyze and then move out across the spectrum to affordable housing, mainstream affordable housing that's going to drive.
I don't think there's inherently a problem with modular homes and prefab homes. Like, I think that it's half decent. You can get some good ones, depending what part of the country you're in. Like the West Coast, the climate's half decent all year round, right? And so it makes sense. The wear and tear on it won't be that bad. But it becomes a little concerning when the Prime Minister, who's pushing for said modular and prefab homes, owns a company or is on the board of a company and is invested in a company that literally makes prefab and modular homes. Like, it's just a little weird. We just dealt with 10 years of scandals, and I'm not going to be gaslit again and believe that it's just a coincidence and that he's not going to try to line his pockets with his own products. But if you have skepticism, or if you're skeptical around this, you have every freaking right to be, because we just dealt with this for quite some time. And it also turns out that Carney's not wearing a Canadian flag on his lapel. He's actually wearing the Order of the Canada pin, which is the highest awarded status for a Canadian. In fact, he was awarded this from Stephen Harper. It's kind of... Why not just wear a Canadian flag pin? Just weird vibes around Carney. Weird vibes.
This is a medium term. This is like 5, 7, 8 years. Is that what we're talking about?
We're more ambitious than that, but you have years, not weeks. Mm-hmm. And you know what? One of the things that's going to characterize this government is being straight with people. Okay, there are things we can do in the short. First off, let's be straight. It's a sunny day. It's beautiful out there. We are in a crisis. We have to get moving. We have to get moving on these major projects. We have to get moving on building one Canadian economy. That is why the First Ministers, the Premiers, and myself are meeting next Sunday in Saskatoon, because we have to get moving. That's why a number of the Premiers are here in Ottawa today. That's why some of the Western Premiers have banded together on some big ideas that we're really looking forward to getting behind. And on and on. So we got to move, but the idea that, I'm not saying you suggested, that we can just snap our fingers and all of a sudden housing in this country, a housing crisis will be solved overnight. No, that's not going to happen. But that's not a reason to wait. We're going to get going.
Well, it's the same thing with the major projects, right? And
it's kind of funny, too, because in order to get prefab homes to remote areas of the country, the only way that you can do it is actually by using diesel fuel to tow them. You can't really do it with gas. It just doesn't have the same type of power and strength that diesel has. You can look this up if you'd like. So that's insane. The carbon footprint on prefab homes is actually really, really high, which is contradictory to their climate agenda, right? Like, again, it's rules for thee, not for ye type of thing. Like, hey, everybody, you guys shouldn't be driving your cars around, but I'm going to hop in my private jet and fly around the world. Again, a little weird. Just full of doublespeak.
And you set me up perfectly for where I wanted to go, was looking ahead to Saskatoon with the meeting with appreciate it. You know, it's time to build. It applies to houses, projects, and the relationships. The premiers all have a list of national projects that have big price tags and require federal approval and federal money. I mean, are we going to see
federal approval? I'm not sure about federal money yet.
I think they might think it involves federal money in some cases, right?
Well, so here's if I may. Do you want to finish your? Sorry.
Well, no, I just wondering, are we going to see specific projects out of Saskatoon? These are the 2 or 3 priorities for this year, next year? What are we going to see in terms of moving this?
What we're signaling in a bold, ambitious plan that's part of the speech from the throne is that we need to move on these nation-building projects. So projects that bring Canada together, projects that diversify our economy, projects that help us export to new markets and really move this economy forward. So yes, the ask of provinces, the ask of the private sector is, which projects do you have that reach those criteria? What we're going to do is fast-track the approval, truly fast-track the approval of those projects. And we are going to name specific projects to which these fast-track approvals apply so that the country can get moving. Now, part of what we're going to do collectively in effect, we're going to have a competition with projects. Some projects are good ideas, but they're not ready. Others are ready, but they're bad ideas. Some projects can purely be driven by private sector interests if the federal government and provincial governments can make approvals quickly, so investors can have the uncertainty. Other projects may provide such benefits to our country, in terms of diversification as an example, and jobs, that it may make sense for there to be some support in some way by the federal and provincial governments. But we look at all of that, we designate the ones we want to, we collectively want to move forward. And when I say we very much include Indigenous partners, Indigenous peoples, because this free, prior, and informed consent applies to all of this and will apply to virtually every project will have an Indigenous component.
Okay, I know you've got to go, but I need to build on the project question. I need to ask you about Alberta, and I need to ask you about the oil and gas sector, because I know you said you want to create an energy superpower, clean and conventional energy. Pipeline is a possibility.
Yeah, let's see what he's got to say about the pipeline.
And Alberta would say one at minimum is what is needed, maybe three, to the north, to the east, and to the west. This is what the Premier said. Is that a reasonable expectation for the Premier of Alberta? And the frustration over this, and you know as someone who grew up in Edmonton, it's driving a lot of the resentment to the national government of Alberta. So as Prime Minister, how do you confront that?
I think there's a couple of things. One is, let's recognize a few facts in terms of pipelines that have been built to Tidewater and projects opening up, whether it's TMX, whether it's Cedar LNG, and beyond. There's a series of LNG projects. More can be done, more should be done, and from our perspective, more will be done. So we will be moving through this process to make these types of projects possible. Now, we don't begin and end the conversation. It's remarkable in some circles, this conversation starts and ends with pipelines.
But that is become politically, right?
No, it's not. No, that is not what it's become politically. That is not what it's become for Canada. Canada as a nation. Mm-hmm. Canadians want, yes, they want energy pipelines that make sense. They also want grid connections between our clean grids. They want actually less carbon, so they want carbon capture and storage pathways project to move forward. They want broader corridors, for example, Gray's Point in Nunavut, that open up whole swaths of the country to new trade. They want critical minerals so that we are sovereign in the most important components of the future. All of those things are possible. And the more we're doing more of them, the more likely this is going to succeed. That's why these meetings and this process is so important. That's why the legislation that we're putting forward, we will put forward in coming days, is so ambitious. We are in a crisis. We can control our destiny. We are a brave, bold, confident nation. We are the true north, strong and free. But freedom is something you earn every day, and that strength is something we need to reinforce.
But how do you confront the separatist sentiment that is there in Alberta? There's a possibility of a referendum next year. I mean, look, how do you approach it?
This is the greatest country in the world, and this is a country that works. It's a government that's committed to working with Canadians across the country. And I know you're pressed for time now. You're pressed for time. One of us are both pressed for time. I got things to do. We got projects to build. But I was born just north of the oil sands. I grew up just south of the oil sands. When I was born, the oil sands was a concept. And it was the ingenuity of many Albertan engineers and entrepreneurs, and the partnership between the federal government and the provincial government that made the oil sands what they are. This is what we need today. We need all of the actors, private sector, we need research, we need scientists, we need the federal and provincial governments working together. And what's going to happen, and I do feel that this spirit is building, is that we're going to see the projects we're talking about aren't just contained within one province. So it needs multiple provinces, it needs Indigenous partners. And the only way to get it, in my view, is to recognize what a moment that we are in, the need for ambition, the need to work together. And I tell you, David, you saw some of this, I'm sure, in your coverage. I traveled across this great country over the course of the last several months. That's what Canadians want. We're going to go to the wall to get it.
Oh my goodness, man. It's just, I feel like we're heading down the path of another 10 years of something that we just freaking don't want. You know what I'm saying? It's just yuck. That's the best way I can describe Mark Carney, is just yuck. That, ladies and gentlemen, concludes the video. I'd love to know what you guys think down below in the comments about all the topics that were covered. If you haven't yet already, I'd like to encourage you guys to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in another video. Bye for now.